In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this weighted balanced orbit satisfying looping animation. And if you'd like to purchase the project files, then you can get that on my Gumroad and my Patreon. The links are in the description. And after watching this video, if you'd like to watch more of my satisfying looping animation tutorials, then definitely check out my looping animations tutorial playlist. The link is in the description. And then just one more thing before we start, I wanted to let you know about my furniture and home asset pack for Blender. In this furniture and home 3D model asset pack, you will get 250 furniture and home Blender 3D models, pre-set up for Blender's asset browser and ready to add to your projects. Quickly fill in your 3D scenes just by dragging the models from the asset browser into your 3D scenes. The models have been split up into 5 different categories in the asset browser. The categories include office assets, living room assets, kitchen assets, dining room assets, and a combined bedroom and bathroom assets. There's also a free demo available that you can try out before purchasing. Check out the product with the links in the description, and you can also find the full product video with the link in the description. Now I will be using a few different free resources online, and all the links to those will be in the description if you'd like to download them. So to get some nice lighting and reflections, I'm going to be downloading this bathroom HDRI from polyhaven.com, and I'll just download the 1K HDR version. And then for some of the metal materials, I'm going to be using my procedural scratched metal material, and so this is a tutorial which I created a while back. So if you'd like to watch the tutorial and learn how to create the metal material, you can find the link in the description, or you can also help support the channel and you can purchase the material on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. Link to that is in the description. And then later in the video when we're adding the materials, I'll show you how to import this material into the Blender file. And then I'll be using 4 different sound effects from freesound.org. So the first one here is this ambience black sound effect, and we'll be putting this in the background to add some cool ambience. And then we'll also be downloading this deep space ambience as well in the background. Then we're going to be adding this rumble bowling ball sound effect, and we're going to be adding this to make that rolling sound effect of the metal piece rotating in the trench. And then we'll also be downloading this rolling ball wood floor sound effect. So if you want to download those 4 free sound effects on freesound.org, the links are in the description. Alright, so here I am in a new scene in Blender, and my screencast keys will be right down here in the corner if you want to see what buttons I'm pressing. So I'll just select everything, and we're just going to delete everything, and I'm now going to add a circle. So I'll go to the add menu, and here under mesh, we're just going to add a circle. And then let's zoom into the circle, and I want to scale this circle down so it is a better size. So I'll scale it down, and then I'll type 0.2 and then enter so it is much smaller, and I'll press Ctrl A and just apply the scale so that's the default size of the object. So I'm going to be using this circle to model that torus part which is going to rotate around. So I'll go into edit mode and I want to make it thicker. So I'll hit E to extrude and then S to scale, and we're going to make that a bit thick like that. Then I can select everything and we're going to extrude everything down. So extrude everything on the Z axis and just bring it down about there. Then I'm going to add a loop cut in the bottom here by pressing Ctrl R. I can move my mouse here and left click and right click so it stays in the center, and I'll hit G to grab and bring it down on the Z axis and make it kind of pointy. Alright, I'll go back to object mode, and I can now press Ctrl 2. Ctrl 2 is going to add a subdivision surface with 2 levels, and I'll use the object context menu and shade is smooth. And I actually want to turn the levels viewport and render up to 3 on the subdivision surface so it's even more smooth. So now I want to sharpen up the edges on the top here, so I'll go into edit mode, I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I'll click and drag up and then click right there, and then Ctrl R to add another loop cut, click there and drag up and place it almost to the top, and then Ctrl R, add another loop cut here and add another loop cut there. So now you can see the edge is very sharp, but then the bottom here is smooth and round. Let's save this project, so click on File and we'll click on Save As. And I'll save this as weighted balanced orbit in a folder on my computer with my other project files, and I'll click on Save As. So I now want to model the piece which is going to be in the very center. So I'll press Shift C. Shift C will center the 3D cursor, and then I'll go to the add menu, and let's go down here and add a circle, and I'll hit tab to go into edit mode. And in edit mode, I'm just going to scale this circle way down so it's much smaller, and then I can press the F key to fill a face there. And then I'll press 1 on the numpad to go to front view. I'll bring the entire thing up on the Z-axis a little bit and maybe scale it up a bit. And then I can extrude the entire thing down, and I'll bring it down just about that far. Alright, and that is going to be the centerpiece. And then I want to add a little inset in the center. So I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I will scroll my mouse wheel so there are two, and then I can left click and right click so they stay in the center. And then I can scale them, and I'll scale them down on the Z axis and make it much more thin. And then I'll hit E to extrude, and then I want to scale it, but then I don't want to scale it on the Z axis. So I will hit Shift Z. So Shift Z will exclude the Z axis, and I'll just scale that to about there, and then click to place that. Then I'm also going to go to the face select, and then I'm going to select this top face, and I'll duplicate it and move it up on the Z axis, and I can scale it way down like that. And then I can extrude the entire thing down, and we're going to make a cylinder which is going through that piece all the way to the bottom. And I'll press 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I want to bring this up on the Z axis, bring it about that far. So you can see if you zoom out in Blender, there are these Blender grids here. So I want this piece to be a little bit farther down, farther than one grid. So you can see here is the top of the grid, and then it goes down 1 and 2, and I just want it to be a little bit farther than one grid. So that's pretty good. We also need to select everything with the A key, and I'll press Shift N to recalculate the normals. And also this bottom face here, I can select this face, and I will just delete the face. And then let's hover our mouse over this cylinder piece here, and I'll press the L key to select the linked vertices, and I'll duplicate it with Shift D. We'll move it over on the X axis, and then I want to rotate it. We'll rotate it on the Y axis, and I'll type 90 and enter. Let's press Ctrl S to save again, and I'll bring it up on the Z axis, and we're going to bring it over to about here, and we can scale it down a little bit, and then we can scale the whole thing up on the X axis and just make the pieces connect. So this is how the center piece is going to connect with the outer ring. But what I want to do is bring the entire thing over a little bit because I want to have a bit of space here because I want to model a detail. You can see if I zoom in here, it's starting to clip the mesh. So if I press 5 on the numpad to go to orthographic view, I can zoom in really close and it won't clip the mesh. So now let's go to the face select, and we'll select this face, and I'll press X to delete, and we'll just delete the faces. Then I'll go to the vertex select. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just select that loop of vertices there. And I'll press E to extrude and then S to scale, and we'll make it much bigger and make it about that big, and then I can extrude the entire thing in on the X axis just like that. Then I'll press the L key to select the link vertices. I think I'll scale the entire thing down a little bit and also bring it down on the Z axis to kind of center it. And then also right here I need to zoom in, and I need to deselect everything and just box select those vertices and bring them over on the Y axis into that other piece. All right, let's go back to object mode, and I'm going to use the object context menu and shade the object smooth, but then I want to add a bevel to the edge of the object. So I'll click on add modifier here on the modifier properties, and I can add the bevel modifier. And I can turn these segments up to like a 2, and then this amount here, I'm going to turn this to a very small number of 0.0005, so 3 zeros and a 5, just so that it's very small. So that's looking pretty good. And then you can see if I look on the edges here, the shading looks a little bit rounded. So to fix this, I'm going to go to add modifier, and I'm going to search for the weighted normal. We'll choose the weighted normal, and you can see that kind of flattens out those flat spots there. So you can see here it is before and here it is after. So the shading just looks a little bit nicer. Now what I also want to do is model like a half circle here that it's going to be rotating around. So I will select this object, and I'll go into edit mode, and then I can press Shift C to make sure the 3D cursor is in the center again. And I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a UV sphere, and I'll scale the UV sphere down and bring it down on the Z axis. And then I want to delete half of the sphere. So I'll hold down the Z button and go to wireframe, and I can press the 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'll deselect everything, and then press B for the box select and click and drag and just select the top vertices there of the sphere, and then we'll delete it by hitting X, and we're going to delete the vertices. Alright, I'll hold down the Z button, go back to solid view. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select the top linked vertices there, or the loop of vertices, and I'll press the F key to fill a face. Let's now press the L key with our mouse hovered over that piece to select the entire thing, and I can scale it down and bring it up on the Z axis just to fit right there on the bottom of that piece. And then I also want to model those weight plates, which are actually going to make it fall down on the animation when it's rotating around. So what I'll do is go to the face select, and I can just select this face. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and bring it over on the X axis, and then I can scale the entire thing up and just make it about that big, and I can bring it down on the Z axis, and then I'll extrude it up, and we're going to extrude it up on the Z axis. All right, maybe bring this piece up a little bit, and then I will press the L key with my mouse hovered over that weight plate there. Let's press 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse into wireframe, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate, bring it up on the Z axis, and then again Shift D to duplicate, bring it up on the Z axis, place it there, and one more time, So Shift D to duplicate and bring it up on the Z-axis. So if I go back to solid view, you can see we now have those weight plates. And I think I want to press the L key with my mouse hovered over these pieces. And I think I want to scale them all down a little bit and then scale them up on the Z-axis a little bit. So something like that. Now, if I zoom in here, let me press 5 on the numpad to go to orthographic view and zoom in here. I think that the bevel modifier is a bit too small. So let's change the size of the bevel modifier. So I think that a size of 0.0005 is much better. So now you can actually see there's kind of a rounding there on the edges, and that just looks a bit nicer. So I'll go with a 0.0005 there on the bevel. So I'm going to want to animate this object, and so when I animate this object, I want the ring piece to move along with it. So we're going to select the ring piece, hold down the Shift key and select the center piece, and I'll press Ctrl P, and we're going to set parent to object, keep transform. So now when I rotate this piece, the other piece is going to move along with it. Now I also want this origin point here to be at the very bottom right there. So what I'm going to do is Shift select both of the objects, but I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select the center piece last. So that is the active object. And I'll press 1 for front view. We're going to go into edit mode and we're going to select the entire mesh. And I'll hit G to grab and we'll bring it up on the Z-axis. And I want to bring it up here so that the very bottom there, that center piece is going to be right there where the origin is. All right, so now if I go back to object mode and just select this piece, you can see when I rotate this, it's rotating from the bottom. So that's good. So what I can do now is rotate this down like this, and then we'll rotate this around on the Z-axis, and that's how we're going to create that satisfying looping animation rotation effect. So I'll press Ctrl Z just to rotate that back. So I now want to model that circular platform, which is going to rotate. So I'll press Shift C again to center the 3D cursor, and I'll go to the add menu and let's add a circle. And then I can go into edit mode. So hit tab to go into edit mode, and I'll scale the entire thing down a bit so it's a much smaller size. And then I'll hit the F key to fill a face there, and then I can extrude the entire thing down on the Z-axis to make it thicker. And then just like we did for this object here, I want to add a little groove in the center. So I'm going to zoom into the object here, and I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I can scroll my mouse wheel until there are 2 loop cuts, and then left click and right click so they stay in the center. And I can scale this down on the Z-axis, and I'll make that quite a bit smaller. So something like that is pretty good. And then I'll hit E to extrude, but then I want to scale it, so I'll hit S to scale, but then I don't want to scale it on the Z-axis, so I'll hit Shift Z to exclude the Z-axis, and just bring it in about that far, and then just place it there. Then I'll go back to object mode, and I'm going to press Ctrl 2 to add a subdivision surface with 2 levels, and I'll go back into edit mode, and I want to select everything, and I need to press Shift N to recalculate the normals. All right, go back to object mode, and I'll use the object context menu and shade the object smooth, and then I want to add some loop cuts to kind of sharpen up the edges. So I'll go back into edit mode, and I'm going to click here to go to the face select, and I'm going to select this bottom face, and I'll hit I to inset, and we'll just inset that face there. Select this face here, and I'll hit I to inset and inset that face there. And then I want to add some more loop cuts here in the center. So I'll press Ctrl R and add a loop cut there. Ctrl R and add another loop cut there just to sharpen those edges. And then Ctrl R, add another one there. And then we'll also add another one there just to sharpen up those edges. And then I think I want to select everything, and I want to scale everything up on the Z-axis just a little bit, and then bring it down on the Z-axis so it's a little bit thicker. So now I want to add that little groove there inside where this piece is going to rotate around this piece. So to be able to see where that's going to be, I need to select the center object, and I'll go to front view, and then I want to rotate this piece down, and I want to stick it down here so it goes inside the other piece. So you can see this piece is now overlapping this piece, and just rotate it down kind of to about that far. I can also select the main piece, and I want to bring the main piece up just a little bit, so something like that is pretty good. So bring it up a little bit more. So I now want to add kind of a little inset right in here so that this piece has a little spot to rotate in, and then I want to add that piece there. So I will go into edit mode, and I'm going to select this face here. So go to the face select and select this face, and I'll scale it down a little bit more. And then I'll hit the I key to inset that face, and I want to inset it down and bring it down much smaller to about there. Then I will hold down the Alt key and select that loop of faces there, and I'll extrude it, and I'll extrude it down on the Z-axis and just bring it down like that. And then I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut in the center, and I'll left click and right click so it stays in the center, and I'll bring it down on the Z-axis and just bring that down like that. So if I now zoom in here, you can see there's a little trench piece for that other object to go in. Let's bring it down a bit more on the Z-axis, so something like that is pretty good. And then I want to sharpen up the edges, so I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and let's drag the loop cut right over there. And then we're also going to add some loop cuts inside. So I'll press Ctrl R to add another loop cut, drag this one up here, and also Ctrl R to add another loop cut, drag that one up there. And then let's go to the face select. We're going to select this face, and we'll press the I key to inset it just a little bit so that it's more sharp there. So if I go back to object mode, you can see those edges are nice and sharp now. Now let's go back into edit mode, and with this center face still selected, I'll hit the I key to inset this, and we'll inset it down like that. And I'll scale it down a little bit more, and then I'll extrude it down on the Z-axis, and we're going to bring it down like that. And then I'll extrude it down on the Z-axis again, and we're going to scale that down. And if it's hard to see what's actually happening, then on the subsurf modifier, you can click on this monitor icon just to hide it, so you can actually see what you're doing, because sometimes the subdivision surface gets in the way of your modeling, and you can see I accidentally moved this over a little bit. So I'll just press Ctrl Z to undo that. So again, I'll hit E to extrude, we'll bring it down on the Z-axis like that. And then E to extrude again, we'll bring it down on the Z-axis, and then we'll scale the entire thing down, and then I'll press I to inset that face and bring it down on the Z-axis one more time. So if I go back to object mode now, you can see we have a little inset right there, and then let's turn back on the subdivision surface modifier so you can see what it looks like. Now you can see that this part here is really smooth, so I'm going to sharpen it up a bit. So I'll go into edit mode, and I'll click here to go to the vertex select, and I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there. And then I can press Ctrl B, and Ctrl B is going to add a bevel. And I'll scroll my mouse wheel until there are like 2 cuts, and then I can just click to place that right there. So now it is much, much sharper. All right, let's zoom out there. I'll press Ctrl S again to save. So again, if I select this object and hit R to rotate and rotate it on the Z-axis, you can see that's rotating around there inside that spot. Now this might be happening for you where this spot has too much space, but then this spot over here doesn't have enough space. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. So I'll select the object, and I'm first going to click on the monitor icon just to hide the subdivision surface so it's easier to see the vertices. I'll now go into edit mode, and I just need to hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices, and then hold down the Shift and Alt key, and we're going to select all those loops and that loop there, and Shift Alt select that loop and that loop and that loop and that loop. So I want to scale them, so I'll hit S to scale, but then I can hit Shift Z to exclude the Z-axis. That way it's not scaled on the Z-axis. So S to scale, and then Shift Z, and you can just bring that in and out so it just fits the object. So something like that is much better. And then I can turn back on the subsurf, so that is fitting much better to the other object. So I can select the centerpiece and I can rotate it on the Z-axis, and that's looking much better. All right, let's press Ctrl S to save. Now this piece here is going to rotate around like this, and it's going to make the weight slide down. So it's going to rotate like this. So I want to add a cylinder piece here that's going to rotate it. So in object mode, I'll press Shift C to center the 3D cursor, and that way I can go to the add menu and I can add a cylinder, and the cylinder will be added in the very center. So I'll now go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale the cylinder way down. We'll make it much smaller. I can also rotate it. We'll rotate it on the X-axis by 90 degrees and hit enter. And I can also bring it out on the Y-axis. Let's click on add modifier, and I want to search for the mirror modifier so that it mirrors it over to the other side. And you can see the X-axis isn't mirroring it. So let's choose the Y instead and turn off the X. So now it is being mirrored. And then I'm going to zoom into the cylinder, and I'm going to go to the face select, and I'll select this face, and we'll delete the faces, and select this face here, and we'll delete the faces. And then you can see that the cylinder isn't really connecting to the very center of that other piece. So I'm going to go back to object mode, and I'll press 1 for front view, and I'll hit G to grab and bring it down on the Z-axis. And I want to bring the origin point down so that it is in the very center of the other object. So let's go back to solid view, and that's much better. It's in the center now. So I'll go into edit mode, and I'll select everything. We're going to scale everything down, and then scale everything on the Y-axis, and then bring it in just to fit that other piece. So something like that. And then go back to object mode, and I'll use the object context menu and shade it smooth. And then real quick, I'm going to go back into edit mode, and I think I'll bring it back in just a little bit more. So that's pretty good. So what I now want to do is create some like hinge pieces, which are going to hold the piece up. So let's go here to the vertex select. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there. And I'll duplicate it and bring it out on the Y-axis. And then I'll press the P key, and we're going to separate by selection. So now this object is its own object. So I'll go back to object mode, select this piece here, and then go back into edit mode. I'll select everything, and I'm going to scale everything up a bit. Then I'll press the F key to fill a face there, and then I can extrude it out, and we'll extrude it out on the Z-axis like that. Then I'm going to go to the face select, and I'll select this face, and I'll hit the I key to inset the face there, and then I'll extrude it back in on the Z-axis, just like that. And then I want to go down here to the bottom, and I want to hold down the shift key, and I want to select the faces here on the bottom, and I'm going to select the 6 faces which are there on the bottom. And I can now extrude them, and I'll bring them down on the Z-axis just like that. You can make them pretty long. And then again, I need to select everything with the A key, and I'll press Shift N to recalculate the normals. All right, that's looking better. So I'm now going to go back to object mode. I'm going to use the object context menu, and I'll shade the object smooth. But then I also want to add a bevel to the edges. So I'll click on add modifier, and I'm going to search for the bevel modifier. And then here on the amount, I'm going to go with a value of 0.0003. So it is a very small amount. And then also the segments here, I'm going to turn this up to 3. And then lastly, just to kind of sharpen the flat areas and make the shading look nicer, I'll go add modifier, and I'm going to search for the weight to normal. And you can see the weight to normal is going to flatten out and smooth out the flat spots. So that's looking much better. Now let's model a platform on the bottom. So again, I'll press Shift C to center the 3D cursor. That way when I go to the add menu, I can add a cube, and the cube is added in the very center of the scene. So I'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale the entire thing down quite a bit, and then scale it on the Z-axis and bring that down there. Maybe scale it up a little bit and then bring it down on the Z-axis. And I just want this cube to be a little bit larger than those hinge pieces. Then I'll go back to object mode, and I want to add a bevel. So I'll click on add modifier, and I can search for the bevel modifier, and we'll turn the segments up to like a 4, and then I can turn the amount way down to a 0.001, just a 0.001, and then we'll use the object context menu, and we'll shade the object smooth. And then again, with this object selected, we'll click on add modifier, and I can search for the weighted normal as well. So now let's add a camera to the scene. So I'll go to the add menu, and let's just go down here to camera. We'll just add a camera, and then I can move my view to wherever I want the camera to be. And then I'll press Control Alt Numpad 0. Control Alt Numpad 0 will bring the camera to where we are. And then if you select the camera and go to the object data properties of the camera, this focal length here, I'm going to turn that up to like 100, and that's going to zoom the camera in and make everything look a bit more flat. And then also let's click here on the output properties, and here on the resolution, I'm going to change this to a square image. So I'll turn both of these values to 1920. So 1920 by 1920, so it is a square image. And then I can hit G to grab, and then I can double tap the Z key to move the camera in and out, and I can just place the camera where I want it. So I'll just place the camera right about there. And then I also want to add a plane for the background. So I'll go to the add menu, let's go here to mesh, and I can add a plane, and I'll zoom over here, and I'm going to bring the plane way back, and I'm going to rotate the plane. Let's rotate it back here. We're just going to add this plane kind of as a backdrop image. All right, I'll press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. I can double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation, and I'll just rotate the plane and kind of stick it right here. Let's bring it back a little bit more and just stick the plane in the background. And this is just going to be kind of a dark material just to add a nice background. All right, so let's now do the lighting. So if you go over here to the render properties, I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine because I am going for realism. However, you could use Blender Eevee if you wanted to. And then also right over here on the render properties, let's go here to the color management, and I'm going to be using the view transform of Filmic, and I'll change the look here to very high contrast, and this will pop out the colors and make things more saturated. All right, so now we can go here to the world properties, and I'll be adding in that HDRI that I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial. So to add in the HDRI, we want to click here on the yellow dot next to color, and let's choose environment texture, and then we'll click on the open button and open up the HDRI. And here's the bathroom HDRI from polyhaven.com. Again, link is in the description. And I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So I'll just click on open image, and I can hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view to see how that's looking. And then there's a few things that I want to change to the HDRI. So let's click over here to go to the shading workspace here. So in the shading workspace, I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'll just go into the camera view. And then over here, I have the shader editor. Now, instead of working with the material nodes, I want to click here on object, and I want to change this to world so that we can edit the world nodes. nodes. And then I basically just want to take out the color of the HDRI so that there's not as much color, because I don't really like kind of the yellowish colors. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the hue saturation value node, and we'll drop this after the bathroom HDRI. And then this saturation here, this is going to be the actual colors. I'm going to turn this way down to a 0.2. So now you can see it looks much more black and white, and I like how the colors look a bit better. Alright, so let's click here on world, and we're going to go back to object so we can edit the shader nodes. And then also here in the camera view, I want to press Ctrl B, and I'm going to drag a box around the camera and then let go. And this is going to add a camera boundary so that the camera will only render what the camera can actually see, but it won't render the other things outside of the camera. And this feature will only work in the Cycles rendering engine. So I'm now going to be adding in my procedural scratch metal material, and I'm selling that material on my Gumroad store and Patreon page if you'd like to purchase it, or if you'd like to watch the tutorial, then you can find the link to that in the description. Now I'm going to show you how to import the material into this Blender file if you've created it in a different project or if you've purchased the material. However, I'm also going to show you how to add it in using my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So I've set up my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, so I can click over here on Assets, and then right here I have my Ultimate Material Pack, and this has all of my procedural materials, and you can see they're pre-set up in Blender's asset browser, and they have custom thumbnails, and they're sorted into catalogs. And if you're interested in purchasing my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, I'll have a link to that in the description. So in my Ultimate Material Pack, what I'm going to do is just click on all, and then I can go here to the search, and I can start to search for scratched, and you can see here is the scratched metal material. So I'm going to zoom in here, and then I will click and drag and just drop the scratched metal here onto this object. And then what I can do is go back over here to the shading. So now you can see that metal material has just been added in. And then if I click over here to go to the material properties, all of my procedural materials in my Ultimate Material Pack have been set up as custom node groups, so you can easily control the material look right here. Now, if you don't have my Ultimate Material Pack and you just want to import a material into this Blender file, then whether you've purchased it or followed the tutorial, you can use Blender's append feature. So to add in the material, you can click here on File, and then you can click here on Append. And then you can locate to the folder where you have the procedural scratched metal material, and you can double click on the Blender file to go into it, and then you can click here on the material folder, and then you can click on the scratched metal and click on Append. So then if you go over here to the material properties and click here on the drop down, or click on plus to add a new material, you can see here's the scratch metal that we've added in, but then here it is in my Ultimate Material Pack. So I just have the same material added in twice. So if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view, you can see there's the material. And I'm also going to click on this object here and click on the drop down and choose the scratch metal. And we'll also click on this object here. We'll click on the drop down, choose the scratched metal, and then also this object here, we're going to click on the drop down and choose the scratched metal. Let's press Ctrl S to save. Now this material, I've created it as a custom node group, so you can see there are many settings that we can use to control the look of the material. And this material is really bumpy, so I want to make it much less bumpy. So I want to make the bump strength very, very small. So on the noise bump strength and the scratches bump strength, I want to change this to a 0.004. And then here on this one, 0.004, so now it is a much more smooth material. And then here on the roughness value, I want to turn this down a bit so it is more shiny, so I'll turn it down to a 0.7. Now as far as the colors go, I do want to change a few of the colors, so I'm just going to make them kind of a little bit darker. So if you want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, for the metal color 1, I'm going to be using the hex value of 4C, 4C, 4C. Then on metal color 2, I'll be using the hex value of 32, 32, 32. And then on the scratches color, I'll be using the hex value of 3C, 3C, 3C. So the material is just a little bit darker. Now I'm also going to be creating a procedural light metal material. So I'm going to click on this cylinder right here. Let's click on new, and I can call it light metal. So call it light metal. Also click on this object here, this hinge piece, and we'll click on the drop down and we're going to choose the light metal material. Now for this material, I'm just going to be making a simple procedural setup. So go here to the shading workspace so that we can create the procedural material. material. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's drop the noise texture here, and then I'll be using the Node Wrangler add-on. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, you can click on edit, you can go to the preferences, and then here in the user preferences, if you go to the add-ons tab, you can go here to the search and you can search for the Node Wrangler, and you can just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and then you can save the preferences if you want to save that, and then we'll close the user preferences. So with the noise texture selected, you can now press Ctrl T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And then also the other feature of the Node Wrangler add-on is to hold down the Control and Shift key, and you can select different nodes with the Control and Shift key held down, and that's going to preview the node on the object. Now if I zoom in here, you can see the material or the noise texture is being really stretched on the object. But if I plug the object up to the vector of the mapping, you can see by using the object coordinates, it's going to place the texture on the objects more evenly. And then I want to change a few of the settings of the noise. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 30. I'm also going to turn the detail to 15 so it's very detailed. And then I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.8. Now this noise texture here, I'm going to put this into the roughness to control the roughness so that some parts are more rough and other parts are more shiny, and then I'll Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And I want to make this material look like metal, so we'll turn the metallic value all the way up to 1, and then this base color here, I want to make it just a little bit darker. And the exact color that I'll be using for the base color is going to be a hex value of 9B, 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 so you can punch that into the hex value if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using. Now this metal material is way too rough and I want to make it more shiny. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to go to the search here and I'm going to search for the color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp here after the noise texture. And we can use the color ramp to control the roughness values. So I'm first going to make it more contrasty by dragging the black tab kind of to about here, but then I'll click on the color and I'm going to turn this up a little bit so it is a little bit brighter, so something like that. And then this white color here, I want to make this just slightly darker, so I'll make this a slightly darker color, so something like that. And if you want to use the same hex values that I'm using, the darker color here is going to be a hex value of 474747, and the light color here is going to be a hex value of D9, D9, D9. So now let's go back over here to the layout because I want to see this in the full screen, and I'll hold down the Z button and go back to solid view. So what I now want to do is add the light metal material to some of the other objects. So I'm going to select this big piece here and I'll go into edit mode and I'll deselect everything, and I just want to select the pieces here in the trench. So first I'll go here to the modifier properties and I'm just going to click on the monitor icon to hide the subdivision surface so you can't see it for now. And then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select that loop of faces, and hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that loop of faces and that loop of faces and that one and also that one there, and Shift Alt select that face there. So now let's go here to the material properties and I want to add the light metal material into the material slots. So we'll click on the plus here to add a new material in the material slots. We'll click on the drop down and we're going to choose the light metal material, and then we'll click on the assign button. So now if I go here to the modifiers, I can click here to show the subdivision surface modifier, and I can go back to object mode. And if I go up into the rendered view real quick just to see that, you can see it has that light metal material. So we'll go back to solid view. Now I also want to add the light metal material to some of these pieces here. So I'll select this piece and I'll go into edit mode. I'll deselect everything and I'll press the L key with my mouse hovered over that piece and also that piece there. And then let's go here to the material properties. We'll click on the plus here to add a new material in the material slot. On the drop down here, we're going to choose the light metal and then just click on the assign button. So now you can see in the rendered view, those cylinders there also have the light metal. And then also we'll select this object here, and this object I'll go into edit mode and I want to select this face here. We'll click on the plus here to add a new material slot. We're going to choose the light metal and then click on the assign button. So then that piece there also has the light metal. Now I also want to add a glowing blue light, and I want to add it into this little piece here and also right there in that piece. So we'll select this piece and we'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there, or the loop of faces, and then Shift and Alt and select that one there and that one there, and we'll create a new material. So I'll click on the plus here to add a new material slot. We'll click on new, and I can just call this material blue light. And then for this one here on the surface, if I click on the green dot here, I'm going to choose the emission material. So we'll choose emission. We'll click on the assign button if we didn't do that already to assign the blue light to that faces there. And then here on the strength, I want to turn this up much brighter to like a 20. And then for the base color, I'm going to make this a nice blue color, and the hex value that I'll be using is 4E8CFF. All right, and then let's also go back to object mode. We'll select this object and we'll do the same thing. So I'll go into edit mode and I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there. We'll click here to add a new material slot. We'll click on the drop down and we'll choose the blue metal, and then we'll click on assign. So now if I go up into the rendered view, you can see we have a cool sci-fi blue material. And then let's also add a background material. So this material is going to be pretty simple. We'll just click on new to add a new material. I'll rename this to background. And for this background color, I'll go to the base color and I'm going to make this almost fully black, so just very, very dark. And I'll leave all the other settings how they are. Let's press Ctrl S to save, and we're now going to be adding some area lights to light up the scene because it is a little bit dark. So I'll press Shift A for the add menu. Let's go down here to light, and I can just add an area light. And I'll bring the area light up here, and let's go back to solid view, and I'm just going to rotate the area light, and I'm going to rotate it right back here. And then if you select the area light and go to the area light settings, let's change the shape type here to rectangle instead, and then I can turn up the X and the Y, and I want to make it kind of like a longer light. And then here on the power, I'll turn this up higher to like a 30, so it's brighter. And I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view so I can see how that's looking. I can kind of rotate this light, and I just want to have kind of a nice bright light there. Then I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I can rotate it over. You can also double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation. And I just want to kind of rotate it right about there so that there's another bright light kind of lighting up the object. And then I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I can rotate this light over here, and we're going to rotate it sideways. So we're just going to have a third light kind of over here to add some nice lighting and reflections on this spot. And then down here, this is still a little bit dark, so I'm going to duplicate this one more time, and I can rotate that over, and we're just going to stick it here kind of on the front, pointing at the object. And I think I'm going to bring it up a little bit, and I'm going to rotate the light over a little bit, and I'm going to stick it right down here to actually get some reflections, and maybe zoom it in a little bit or bring it in a little bit closer. All right, so I'll go back to solid view, and I now want to set up some parenting so we can do the animation. So this object, I want this object to rotate, and then the other objects will move along with it. Now this object is already parented to this object, so I'm going to select this object here, the centerpiece. Then I'll hold down the Shift key and select this piece last, and I'll press Ctrl P, and we'll set parent to object cube transform. Then we'll select this piece here, and I want this piece to be moved by this piece, so I'll shift select this object last, and I'll press Ctrl P, and we'll set parent to object cube transform. So if I select this hinge piece and rotate around on the Y axis, you can see it's going to move the entire thing. So this is what we'll be using to do the animation. So now let's do the animation. So I'm going to have my animation be 150 frames. So here on the end frame, let's just type in 150. So it is shorter. And I want to start by animating this piece here in the center. So I'll select the center piece. And then I'll move my playhead here over to frame 15. And I want to rotate this piece. But I'm first going to add a keyframe just right here at frame 15. Now in older versions of Blender, the shortcut key was the I key, but in the new Blender update of Blender version 4.1, the shortcut key was changed to the K button. So I'll hit the K button, and then we're just going to choose rotation. Now I'm going to go over to frame 50, so just drag the playhead over to frame 50, and I'm going to rotate the object on the Z-axis, and I'm going to rotate it right here so it is about in the very center right there, so that the weight plates there are on the very back. And then hit the K button again, and we'll choose rotation. So I'm now going to go over to frame 70, and I will rotate it again, and we'll rotate it on the Z-axis, and I'm going to bring it all the way over kind of to about there. Hit the K button again, and we'll choose rotation to add a keyframe, and then I'm going to go over to frame 85. So I'll move to frame 85. I'm going to rotate this again. We'll just rotate it on the Z-axis, and I'm going to bring it all the way over kind of to about there, and then hit the K button again, and then choose rotation. Then I want to go to the very end frame, and I want to rotate this back to where it is. But to make sure it's a looping animation, I want the rotation to be at the exact same spot. So the best way and the easiest way to do this in this example here is to actually go all the way back to the starting before frame 15. So I'm just going to go to around frame 10, and this is where I want it to be. So we can't add a keyframe right here. We need to rotate it all the way around by 360 degrees and then add a keyframe. So I will hit R to rotate. and I'll rotate it on the z-axis, and instead of rotating it by 360 degrees all the way around, I want to rotate it negatively, so I'll type in -360, and you can see right up here on the left top corner of the screen, it says -360, and then along the z-axis, and then we're going to hit the Enter key. So now we'll hit the K button and we're going to insert rotation. So because we rotated this around by 360 degrees negatively, it's going to rotate all the way around, but I want this keyframe here at frame 10 to be at the very end. So I'm going to click here to select the keyframe, and I'll hit G to grab, and I'm going to move it all the way over here, and I'm going to stick it right at frame 150. So now if I press the spacebar to play, you can see it goes really fast, and then it slows down here at the very end and then stops, and you can see frame 1 and frame 150 are at the same exact spot, so that way it'll be a nice seamless looping animation. And you can see how I did the timing. I made it so that it starts to move faster and faster as it's going to rotate, so it's basically sliding down faster. Then right here in kind of the center of the animation, it's rotating really fast because the weights have really made momentum, and then as it kind of goes back up here, it's going to slow down. Now, of course, this wouldn't really make sense to the real world because right now it would just be sitting here and it doesn't really have anything which is going to change the weight position and move the weight. So that is where we're going to rotate this piece here so that the weight is going to fall down and rotate it around. So we're going to select this piece right here. This is the hinge, and I'm going to move my playhead over to frame 5, and I'll hit the K button and I'll just insert rotation. Then I'm going to go over to frame 70, and at frame 70 I'm going to have it rotated over. So I'll press the 1 for front view, and I'll rotate it way down, rotate it down like that, just about that far, and then hit K again, and we're going to insert rotation. So now if I play this, you can see it starts to tip, and so now the weights look like they're falling down because it's being rotated. And I think that rotation might be a little bit too far, so I'll press 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'm going to rotate it up a little bit so it doesn't have quite that much of an angle. Rotate it like that, and then I can press the K button again, and I'll insert rotation, and because we were on frame 70, it overrided the keyframe. Now I'm going to go over to frame 105, so move the playhead to 105, and I want to rotate this back. So what I'm going to do is just select the first keyframe, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I can drop it here at frame 105. So now if I play this, you can see it rotates down, it slides down, and then it kind of moves back up, and so then it slows and then stops there. So we can now get this ready for the rendering. So what I'm going to do is press Shift C to center the 3D cursor, and I want to add an object to add a depth of field. So I'll go to the Add menu, let's go to Empty, and I can add the plane axis, and then I can scale the empty way down, and I'll make it much smaller, just stick it right there in the center. And then if I select the camera, I can go to the camera settings, and right here I want to check mark the depth of field. And then here on the object here, what it's going to focus on, I'm going to click on the eyedropper and we'll choose the empty object. And then if I go into the camera view and go into the rendered view, you can see what the depth of field is doing, and you can change the f-stop value to change the depth of field. And I'm going to turn my f-stop value to a 5. I think 5 is pretty good. So now let's go over the render settings. So we'll go here to the render properties, and here on the sampling, I found that 200 samples is pretty good for this scene, so I'll go with 200 samples, but you could of course turn that down if it's taking too long to render. You could also turn on the render denoise, but I'm instead going to be using the denoise in the compositor just because I like using it a bit better. And then also let's turn on this motion blur here, and that way when the object is moving really fast, it'll add motion blur, and that will add more realism. Now to make the scene render faster, I can also turn down the light paths. So we'll open up the light paths here, and we're going to open up the max bounces and the clamping and caustics. Now I'm going to turn the filter gloss to 0. We're also going to turn off these values here, and the indirect light, turn that to 0, and the transparency and the transmission, turn all that to 0. Now the total, the diffuse, and the glossy, I'll just leave those at 2, but all the other values will be 0. So by turning down the light paths, Blender won't have to calculate them, so it'll render faster. Let's press Ctrl S to save, and then we're just going to render one image, so I'll press F12 to render. And while that is rendering, I can actually go set up the compositing that I want to do. So I'm going to click here to go to the compositing workspace, and I'll click on Use Nodes, and then I'll go to the Add menu, and I'm just going to search for the denoise node, and we'll drop this here, and I'll change the accurate to fast so it goes a bit faster. And then I also want to add a glare, so I'll go to the Add menu, and I'm going to search for the glare, and we'll drop the glare here after the denoise, and this is going to make the lighter parts have a little bit of a glow. Now on the stream streaks here, I want to change this to fog glow instead. And then to preview it in the background, I need to use the viewer node. So we enabled the Node Wrangler add-on earlier in the video. So I'll just Control Shift and select the glare, and that's going to add the viewer node so we can preview the rendered image in the background. Alright, and then once it's finished rendering, it will composite, and if for some reason the compositing isn't showing up, you might need to unplug the viewer node and then plug the image back up to the viewer. And then I'm also going to press the V key just to zoom the camera out a bit. So there you can see there is the finished render, and you can of course see the fog glow there is adding that nice glare there. But on the medium here, on the quality, I'm going to choose high instead, so it's a bit higher quality. Alright, so I'm now going to have this render all of the images to frames in a folder, and then we'll use Blender's video editor to compile the frames together and add the sound effects. So let's go here to the output properties, and right here on the output, I'm going to choose the file format of JPEG, or you could also use PNG, and then here on the quality, I'll turn that up to 100. And then here on the output, let's choose a folder here to save the images. So here in my project files, I'll click on this plus here to add a new folder, and I can call this frames, and I can go inside the folder and click on the accept button. So then when we render all the frames to images, it'll save them in the folder. Let's press Ctrl S to save again, and then we'll click on render, and we'll click on render animation, and I'll skip to when the animation is finished. Alright, so the project has finished rendering, so I've just opened up a new Blender file, and we're going to go to Blender's video editor. So to go to the video editor, you can click on File, and you can click on New, and you can open up a new video editing. And then here in Blender's video editor, we'll press Shift-A for the add menu, and we're going to choose Image and Sequence. And then we'll just locate to the folder where we have our frames, we'll go inside the folder, and I'll press the A key to select all the images, and we'll click on Add Image Strip. And then right after you add the images, what you want to do is select the strip, and you want to click here on strip, and then you want to click on the set render size. So it'll set the render size to the same render size that we actually rendered the images. And then I can press the space bar to play this, and we can watch the looping animation. And then to make it loop, we can just press Shift D to duplicate. We can just drop the same frames here. And then we can also turn up this end frame here. And by turning up the end frame, it'll make it longer. And I can just continue to duplicate this as many times as I want. So now I'll show you how I added in the sound effects. So over here on my file browser, I have the 4 different sound effects that I'm downloading and using. And they're all free sound effects from freesound.org. And the link will be in the description if you want to download the same sound effects. So the first one that I'll be using is this bowling ball sound effect. So I'm just going to drop this right in here. And what I'll do is hit G to grab, and I'm going to move the sound effect over to the very end because I want to use the very end spot. And I'm just going to make it so that this sound right here at the very end happens right about here when it is moving around at its fastest point. So something like that. And then also if you move the playhead right here, you can cut this by pressing the K button. Now I've changed my shortcut key to the S button just because I like that better. But in Blender, the shortcut key for cutting strips is the K button. And then I can just hit X to delete. So now we just have that sound effect there. And then the next sound effect that I'm going to be adding in is the rolling ball sound effect. So I'll just drop this in here and then I can play this. And on the volume here, I'm going to turn it down to like a 0.5 so it's not quite as loud. And then I want to use the very first clip right here. So I'll hit G to grab, and I'm going to move it over here, and I'm going to move it so that the sound effect starts right when the sphere part here starts to rotate around. So something like that. All right, and then it gets quiet about here. So I'll press the K button, or in my case, the S button to cut that, and then we'll just delete the rest of the audio. So now we can just play through this and we have some nice sound effects. So now that I've added those 2 sound effects, I want the same sound effects to be looped. So I'm going to select these strips here, and I will just hit the X key to delete them, and I'll press B for the box select, and I'll just box select all of these 3 strips here, and then I'll press Ctrl G. Ctrl G will join them together into a meta strip, and so now you can see we just have 1 strip which has the video and the audio. So I can now just press Shift D to duplicate this, and I can just continue to drop it here as many times as I want to make it a looping animation. So now I'm going to be adding in the other sound effects. So I'm first going to be adding in this deep space ambience, so I'll just drop this here, and I'm going to move it over here, and then I can play it. And I'm going to turn the volume way down to like a 0.2 so it is not very loud. And then you can also press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here, and you can just continue to have it loop again and again. So you can just put another one here and just have it loop as many times as you want. And then the last sound effects is this ambient black sound effect. I'm going to hit G to grab, bring this over here. And then what I'm going to do is click on the time here on the end side panel, and I'm going to click on show retiming keys. This will show me a keyframe here and a keyframe here, so at the starting and the ending. And if I select the ending one, I'll hit G to grab and I can pull it out, and this is going to make it play slower. So now if I just play through this, we have this very slow, kind of eerie ambience in the background. I'm also going to turn the volume way down to just a 0.07, so it is not very strong. And then I can just move this around wherever I want, and I can just kind of have this playing through the scene. And then of course, if you wanted to, you could cut the strips and duplicate that sound effect many times. But that is pretty much it for the sound effects that I added. So now I'll just set the end frame to about here. So I'll just delete this one here, and I'll turn up the end frame, and I'm going to turn the end frame all the way up to 750, and that way it's going to loop 5 times. You can have it loop as long as you want. So let's render this to a final video. So I'm going to scroll down here to the output, and we'll click on this file icon to set an output. And I'll just save this in the folder with my other files. I'll call it looping video, and I'll click on accept. And then for the file format, I'm going to use the FFmpeg video. And if I open up the encoding here, I'm going to use the MPEG-4 container. I'll use the video codec of H.264. I'm going to choose medium quality and good. And then for the audio, I'm going to use the audio codec of AAC. So then if you want to, you can save the video editing project, and then you can click on render and render the animation. And that'll wrap it up for the weighted balanced orbit satisfying looping animation. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files and help support the channel, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the product links in the description. And if you join my Patreon memberships, then as well as supporting the channel monthly, you'll also get access to lots of content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node, modifier setups, and much more Blender content on my Patreon page. And if you'd like to learn how to create more looping animations, then definitely check out my looping animation tutorial playlist. The link to that is in the description, and you can watch other tutorials on how to create many more looping animations. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.